Hi everyone! If you've watched the introductory video of this series, you will know that in these videos I'm going to talk about each of the subsections of the Russian C1 language exam. In this video, I'm going to talk about the writing test. So writing is one of the more daunting sections, and I definitely panicked when I was preparing for the exam because the first time I did the test and I asked the teacher to mark it for me, I failed. So I thought, oh my God, I'm going to fail the exam. But luckily, I found that this is one of the exams, one of the subtests that you can definitely prepare for. And once you know what the examiners are looking for, it's not too difficult to pass. So I'm going to tell you all about that now. First, there's a general comment about this test, which is that it is quite compressed time-wise, and you need to manage your time well. So when I took the test, we were given 90 minutes, although in the practice test that I bought, it actually said 75 minutes. So I don't know whether they changed the rules and allowed more time. But basically, it's still very compressed because you need to complete 3 tasks. And I would really urge you to stick to the recommended time for each section. And then the second point is you need to be armed with many formulaic phrases because you want to not be thinking about those formulaic phrases while you're doing the test. You should just be able to use those phrases on autopilot, basically. And this is where the rigidity of the test design is going to help you, actually. Another point that I learned while preparing for this exam is actually Russian is a much more rigid language in terms of word combinations compared to English. So another good thing about memorizing phrases is that if you're inventing a new phrase, it's quite probable that it's stylistically wrong in Russian, even though like the equivalent would sound fine in English. So now we're going to dive into the 3 tasks themselves. In the first task, you need to write a letter to a friend about an article that you have just read. And so as part of the task, you need to read the article itself, and it is pretty long, I think around 500 words, and the recommended time for completing this task is 25 minutes. So basically, you can think of all these tasks as a box-ticking exercise to some extent. One of the aspects that are being tested is whether you are using the right format and registers. So because this is a letter, make sure you know the format that's used for a letter, informal letter in Russian, and then just remember the phrases that are usually used in the letter. So «Привет, Саша, у меня все хорошо, как у тебя дела? Я знаю, что ты интересуешься», and you can mention the topic of that article. So you're kind of straight in, you don't need to worry about how you're starting the letter. And then another aspect that the examiners will be looking for is whether you can cite the source of the information correctly. So usually that's found at the very end of the article. It will say sort of the source of the information is источник, so it could be from a website or a newspaper. So just make sure you mention that in the beginning. Я прочитал статью в газете, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of the stuff at the beginning. And the bulk of your letter should be devoted to summarizing the article. And in the article, you will find points of views from different experts. So yeah, basically you want to mention kind of each person. And the important thing is to show structure in the letter. So that can be done very easily. You can use phrases like во-первых, во-вторых. And then you need to control the length and of course the time you spend on this task. So I would recommend that you basically summarize the view of one person in one sentence. So it could be a complex sentence, but don't be tempted to kind of explain too much and then you spend too long on one particular expert and you don't have time to go into the rest of the article. And then another thing that you need to show is your ability to give an assessment of what you've read. And basically the way to do that is to say, use a phrase like "Я считаю, что мнение этого эксперта важно, верно," that kind of thing. You don't need to give a lot of your own opinion about whatever the topic is, but just make sure that you are sort of giving a bit of your own assessment. I would encourage you to obviously practice and find your own formula that you are most comfortable with. The second task is actually quite similar to the first one. You also need to summarize a text that you need to read at the same time allocated. But it's a much shorter text that you need to produce, so it needs to be between 50 to 70 words, and you get 20 minutes to complete it as a recommended time. There are basically three things to be aware of for this task. The first is you need to show that you can communicate in a formal context, so make sure that you start your text, which is usually a letter or a public announcement, with уважаемый, and then the person, or it could be a group of person, in which case уважаемые, and then close with с уважением. And also it's a good idea to just come prepared with some generic Slavic names, so you don't need to be thinking about, you know, who are you addressing it to, because often the task will ask you to imagine that you're a director of a company addressing another client or a director, so you need to use kind of formal address like Vladimir Alexandrovich. So just be prepared with some names and don't need to rack your brains during the exam. Another useful phrase is предлагаем ознакомиться с. So that's a phrase that you basically can use in any context at the beginning. So again, you're just starting your text straight on and don't need to worry about how you're going to start the letter. And you can basically add the topic of the article that you're summarizing after ознакомиться с. And then the second point is you need to use conventional abbreviations in the text that you produce. This might be easier or harder depending on the article that you get. So in my exam, the article actually already contained lots of abbreviations, so it was basically very easy to use them. But it might not be the case, and you should also be aware that Russian has a very particular way of abbreviating things. So for example, ruble, you have to use RUB dot. So it's not like you can just make them up on the spot. So make sure you know the most common abbreviations, for example, for год, тому подобное, так далее. So those phrases you can kind of use as well in any situation. So if your text doesn't have a lot of abbreviated phrases, then you can kind of throw those in to show that you're using the abbreviations. And then thirdly, they are also testing your ability to summarize. And in some ways, this one is a bit harder than the first one because the text is about as long, but it's a much shorter text that you produce. So make sure that you are really just extracting the keywords. The third task is a discursive essay. You get a choice of 3 questions, so you just choose 1 out of the 3. And the essay is usually about topics of social interest, economics, education, technology, that kind of thing. So I actually don't like how they designed this part of the test because they have quite rigid criteria, and they ask you to characterize the problem and discuss the subjective and objective reasons for the problem and provide a solution. And additionally, you need to assess the urgency of the problem and talk about the role an individual plays in this problem. And I think it's an overly rigid way to design this part of the test, because not every social problem can fit easily in this mold. And I kind of instinctively find it easier to do a for and against style essay, which this doesn't really allow you to do. So this is the structure that worked for me. In the first paragraph, you want to introduce the problem, and it's also a good idea to say explicitly that this problem is very relevant or urgent. So это проблема очень важна, очень актуальна. And then in the second paragraph, you need to give an objective reason. So by objective reason, they mean reasons that are out of your personal control, the way that kind of society operates, that kind of thing. And then you want to maybe control your paragraphs by sentence, so kind of aim for 2 long sentences to 3 kind of medium length sentences, and then you move on to the next point. And in the next paragraph, you might want to give another objective reason, or you can go to a subjective reason. So by subjective, they mean reasons that are kind of under individual control or kind of relate to the psychological aspects. So if it's like an environmental problem, then you could say, people are too lazy and they don't want to recycle or something like that. But make sure that you do have a paragraph for a subjective reason. So at least 1 paragraph for objective, another paragraph for subjective. So you're ticking the boxes. And then you also need to tick the box about personal involvement. And you need to kind of signal that you're talking about it. So maybe you want a sentence like «Личное участие играет важную роль, потому что…» And then you also want to say very explicitly what you are doing about the problem. So start a sentence with «я» and then say what you're doing. It doesn't really matter like if it kind of makes sense. You can talk in a very far-fetched manner, but it's important to show that you talk about yourself and what you're doing about the problem. And then in the final paragraph, you need to offer solutions. So you could say something like «Путь решения состоит в том, что…» and then give your solution, and then basically you can kind of end your essay there. And of course, this is just a suggestion, and I think it's important that you find your own scheme or formula that you are comfortable with. So by all means, practice writing the essays under exam conditions, time yourself, and then get someone to correct your essays. Hopefully that has been helpful to give you some ideas and structure around how you approach those tasks. If you've got any other questions, please do leave a comment and I will try to answer them as best I can. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.